This PD presentation will help you understand how to incorporate student-generated questions in daily instruction. So the rationale behind this idea, it kind of comes from Google's 20% time. It was also known as innovation time off. During Google's 20% time, it allowed employees to use 20% of their workday to work on ideas and projects that actually interest them, and it wasn't allowed to be job related. The reason why they did this was because it allowed them to be innovative and create ideas without failed politics or budgets and any other problems that may present themselves in the workplace. Because of Google's 20% time, Gmail has really perfected its features. AdSense was created, Google News was created, as well as Google Teacher Academy. So from Google's 20% time, some of the best ideas came from the innovative time that Google employees were allowed. So the way that this transfers over to 20% time in the classroom is it just allows time for students to explore their own interests. So some of the steps that go into this are student-generated questions based on their interests, students using multiple resources to gather information, students using resources along with other knowledge to answer their questions, students consider an audience to share their information and choose an appropriate means to share, students reflect about the process of their learning along the way, and students use teacher and peer feedback regularly along the way. The theory that really goes along with this and supports the Google 20% time in the classroom is the unfoldment theory. The book Lenses on Reading really had a good quote that summarizes what unfoldment means. It says, learning was most facilitated through natural unfolding of the mind based on individual curiosity and interest. So basically, this theory means that students should focus on something that they're interested in, and it will naturally evolve into curiosity, and the students will learn in that way. Manipulatives are also supposed to enrich the environment. We connected this to Montessori in that theory, so this is kind of how I'm seeing it in the classroom today. Some people kind of are hesitant to get started with 20% time. So I am comparing 20% time with literacy, so you can see how they kind of go together. Part of the process for 20% time is brainstorming interests, selecting a passion, questioning, planning, researching, interviewing, reflecting, organizing, presenting and sharing, and use of technology. So when you're brainstorming your interests, how that relates with literacy is how students access their background knowledge and schema when they're reading. When you're selecting a passion, it could help students select books that they're interested in or topics that interest them as well. The questioning component of 20% time really is used a lot in it really is a big part of the 20% time. And for literacy, it is really coming up with higher level and lower level thinking questions, like in Bloom's taxonomy. And it can be applied to reading by the questioning strategy. So that's been really helpful in my classroom when I've been teaching questioning, now that they have the knowledge with the 20% time, as well as the reinforcement with my literacy instruction. The next step in 20% time is planning, and that can really help students with sequencing events or summarizing. After that, researching, they're really using a lot of different literacy skills here. Use of nonfiction features, both online and in an actual book, is probably what I see most commonly used. Interviewing kind of goes along with that, just kind of seeking outside sources and writing with that. For the, inferring answers to higher level thinking questions, that's kind of moving on to that organizing step, and I'll get back to that reflecting step at the very end. That organizing step really forces students, since they are using these higher level thinking questions, they are inferring the answers to their questions based on what they've researched and from multiple sources and what they already know. Synthesizing is also a big component of that organizing step because they're taking information from various sources and making a unique idea. The reflecting step really forces students to discuss their metacognition along the way. So they're talking about things that they do well, things that they struggle with, and why. And then when you get to the presenting and sharing component of 20% time, students are really practicing their language and speaking skills. They're also doing that in the interviewing component of 20% time. And then the use of technology, that's just something that I know a lot of teachers want to include in their daily instructions. So this is just another way. I'm not going to read through all of the Common Core and 20% time correlations, but you can kind of glance at these, and just the point is that 20% time really fits into the goals of Common Core. Now, students won't be necessarily doing all of these since, like I said, their projects are very unique to what their interests are, but at least some of these standards will be met based on their projects. So with with 20% time, there are some positives and negatives. So some of the pros are that students are given the freedom to explore their interests. But one of the cons is that students haven't developed the skills to completely do these projects independently. Students apply various skills in an authentic and meaningful way, which is a pro. It promotes creativity, and it's really engaging for students. Also, feedback is provided regularly to help students. Some more cons are that it's challenging for educators to find time. The management of multiple projects can at times be overwhelming, both in the classroom and just with a feedback component. The lack of correlation with the curriculum is hard for some teachers to accept. And with the 20% time, kind of like how Google didn't really want failure to be a component of it, the assessment isn't really a big component of 20% time either. Just some more pros and cons include that students are learning how to problem solve. Students are reflective of their learning or being metacognitive. Students learn from each other. And what I find most important is that students are really learning how to learn. Some of the cons, some more cons, include finding time for students with IEPs to be included. I know that was one of the biggest challenges when I was implementing 20% time because it's most effective when you do it in a block of probably 90 minutes, and some students with IEPs need to leave the room during that time, and it just logistically can be challenging. Resources also may not be available. I know that our school is not one-to-one with devices, and even though we do have a lot of technology, it is still going to be a challenge to get all of the resources we need once all of the school is implementing the 20% time. Since this is new, many students also have a hard time adjusting to this type of learning. I think that could also go in the pros because it is a process, and students, although they have a hard time, they really do figure it out eventually. These are just some other professional texts and resources that I've heard of. And then I'll just take you to my PSI website. This is the website where I hosted all of my PSI project. Along this side, I have the home section, which has mini lessons that I taught to help students solve problems and get resources. The how-tos, that was kind of for their project. When they got to that final step, these were computer tutorials and written directions on how to use materials. It was just meant to be a resource to students. Student feedback, this was used at the end where students could just give ideas on what we could do next time with PSI. And the templates, this was just for my own convenience really, because each student page, which I'll show you in a second, has its own template. So along the side I listed all the student projects, and it's really nice to have them all in one spot and I don't have to bring home multiple things here and there. So each student has an audience page, a documentation page, reflections page, and resources page. On the audience page, this is where students, at this point when students go on to this website, students have already created a higher level thinking question that they can research. The next step that they have to do is go on to the audience page and determine who their audience is and what they want to share with their audience and how they're planning to do it. Once they've done that, that means they've kind of come up with their final product. The next step moves on to the documentation page. And this is where students begin their plan and start writing their notes. So they start with getting a plan down, so pretty much they can use this as a checklist. And each day they take notes on what they've learned and how they've answered their questions. The reflections page is something I had students do every single day because I felt that it was important for students to consider what was challenging for them, how they persevered through it, and what their goals are for next session. It also requires students to decide whether or not they were using their time well. And then the resources page, we really emphasize the importance of not taking credit for work that you haven't produced. So this is just their way to cite their sources, and they would cite that at the bottom of the page. I hope you enjoyed learning